Thank you, Andrew. And thank you, all of you, for coming here tonight. So tonight we're going to talk about art. As I think some of you know, that I run a website which I started 6 years ago, just as I joined seminary. Because as you probably know, I used to work in the art world for over 20 years. And just as I started seminary, the website started as trying to hold on a bit to the old life, to write about art, and then as I was making my way through seminary, then start sort of to write about all the spiritual things as well. And I think when I see my writings of 6 years ago, and now maybe 6 years ago, certainly the first few weeks, 90% talks about the artwork, 10% about religion, and I think now it's maybe 60-40 in favor of religion. So it's been something that's been very dear to me in my own sort of journey coming to the priesthood, and now, I mean, it's wonderful. We have good readership and people who support us as well, which is great. So thank you so much for coming here tonight. So what I want to explore tonight is beauty in the eye of the beholder, because that's one of these things when we talk about art with our friends, is that you like this thing, I like that. I can't understand why you like this painting. I think it's terrible. And then you can't understand why you find this beautiful. So there is a great sort of subjectivity to it. Or is there something like objectivity in beauty? That beauty, some artworks are just so beautiful that it transcends the subjective realm. And that is what I want to explore a bit tonight. So I want to start with 3 stories. The first story happened in 2009. And it was an experiment that the Washington Post did. And the Washington Post asked Joshua Bell, you know, this very famous violinist who was in Washington to perform a concert. And the tickets for the concert were selling at an average of $250 a ticket. So the Washington Post asked Joshua Bell if he could go to the underground station, to the tube, and start playing there exactly the same concert that he played the night before. And so Joshua Bell arrived in the tube station. He unpacks his violin, a Stradivarius. He starts playing, and he plays for about 60 to 90 minutes, exactly the same program that he did the night before, and he collected $31. And so exactly the same music, exactly the same musical instrument, this wonderful Stradivarius that the collector in Washington, who owned the Stradivarius, gave him to play. You know, these wonderful instruments of this late 17th, early 18th century craftsman in Cremona, Antonio Stradivari, and they sell for sort of $2-3 million on average. I think there's about 600 violins still left in the world. So, same music, same program, same player, same instrument. Yet, everybody just walked past it. Nobody took note, nobody took attention. Second story. Imagine the father in a family comes home in the evening. The little daughter runs to him and said, "Daddy, Daddy, I made you a drawing." I just picked sort of a random drawing there in the middle. And to the father, this drawing is as precious as a drawing by Rembrandt or whoever. The father is incredibly pleased. He will probably take this drawing, pin it on the fridge, and relish in it. But what if the father, for example, would take this drawing the next day into work and show it to one of his colleagues? His colleagues would say, "Well, I mean, that's a beautiful drawing, but for you, I mean, it's your daughter. That is where the value of the drawing is." the fact that it's your daughter. Again, complete subjectivity there, because the beauty lies in the fact that it's a member of his family has made the drawing. Right. Then we come to another story. This was a story you're probably all familiar with, Tate Britain, and then with the Turner Prize. So this was an entry in the Turner Prize in 2004 by a German artist, Gustav Metzer. That's the illustration there on the right. And that was the entry that he sent in 2004 for the Turner Prize. So it consists of a table with a bit of rubbish on it, above it a sheet of plastic that he found on a scrapyard that is literally just hanging over a frame. And then you see this bin bag here on the right. So it's sort of an installation piece composed of these three different elements. One of the mornings, the cleaning crew came in. You can see already where this is going. And they removed the bin bag. The curators were incredibly upset. And so the security guard got fired there and then. The artist, in a way, wasn't upset, because he said, that's what I like, is that there is some interaction with my work, that people don't just look at it, but that they respond to it, that they interact with it. And a few hours later, another bin bag appeared. So there, for the curators, this work had immense value. This bin bag that was removed upset them to the core. And yet, to the security guard, this was not probably even a work of art in his eyes. So there we are, three stories that maybe tell us about subjectivity versus objectivity. And I think if we can move to the next slide, what I want to do now is to hear from you if you find the next 5 pieces sort of beautiful or not. So don't worry, this is not like a test or anything. So raise your hands if you like this work. Yeah, nearly all of you actually. So this is Michelangelo's Pietà. It's probably one of my favorite works of art in the world. Michelangelo made this when he was only 24 years old. So it was made for a French cardinal who was working in the Vatican, and the French cardinal was already thinking of his tombstone. So he heard of this amazingly talented man that had just arrived in Rome after sort of training in Florence. And so he asked Michelangelo to build him and make him a sculpture, and he gave him complete free rein. He didn't say, you should depict the Pietà or anything. So this has become one of Michelangelo's most famous sculptures, and I think the beauty is probably in the fact that Mary is not shown as all sorrowful. She's got this great sort of serenity over her face, as if she's accepting her fate. She's accepted what her cooperation means in the story of salvation. And so she's got this beautiful gesture there as well, with the hand which is pointing to us, the viewer, to invite us into this very scene. So this is the only sculpture that Michelangelo ever signed. And he signed it not as he delivered and as he completed the sculpture. So what happened was that the sculpture was completed, it went on display because the French cardinal thought, he said, well, this is incredible. I mean, I can't wait until I die that people see this. People already have to see this now. So it went on display. And Michelangelo was, because nobody really knew him, was standing around the people commenting on this sculpture. And people were saying, who made this sculpture? And they would say, oh, well, I think it's such and such. And other people were saying, I think it's such and such. And Michelangelo, being in his early 20s, he got so annoyed and so frustrated that one of the evenings he went in with a hammer and chisel and he carved his name here on the sash there of Our Lady from the top right to the bottom. Michelangelo Buonarroti fecit. So Michelangelo made it. So just to sort of prove the point. And it's an act that he did, and later on in life he writes about that because he died when he was very old. He was 88 years old when he died. And later on he always regretted it, and he said, that was actually a great act of pride in my early 20s, and I should have never signed this sculpture. Great. Moving on to our second work of art. This is a painting by Jean-Michel Basquiat. Who likes this? You can raise your hands. Yeah, maybe about 10, 12 people. Yep. So much more difficult painting, I think, objectively speaking. Painted in 1982. He died very young, at the age of 28, as part of the AIDS epidemic in New York. And these paintings are now, in the art market, some of the most coveted paintings. This painting, as you can see, sold for $110 million. It was bought by Jay-Z and Beyonce, so they are the proud owners of it now. But yes, a much more difficult work. Okay, third work of art. Who likes this painting? Yeah, probably about 80% of you, yes. I'm slightly biased as to why I really love this painting. So this painting is literally as tall as this whole screen. So the size of the illustration there is probably 1.5 times bigger than that. And it's at the Escorial, just outside Madrid. So Rogier van der Weyden grew up in Bruges, where I grew up, and he's one of the first and foremost medieval painters. So what the Flemish painters at the time did was to invent oil paint. So before then, in Italy mainly, the pigments of the paint were bound together with the yellow of an egg yolk to bind the paintings. That's why a lot of these sort of very early paintings have got this sort of yellowy glow to it. So the Flemish painters invented oil painting. So that's literally mixing the powdery pigment with oil, mixing it, and then you have paint. The big advantage of oil paint is that if you make a mistake as a painter, you can just paint it over and make corrections. And the other advantage is with oil paint is that you can build layer upon layer upon layer. So we see now artists, if they want to paint a blue sky, that it's not just a sort of one uniform blue for the sky, but now they can actually start with a white layer and then a light blue, a darker blue, an even darker blue. And so we get this depth now in these paintings. And so Rogier van der Weyden, who lived, he slightly overlaps with Jan van Eyck, started sort of being this great master of Flemish painting using this new oil paint technique. This painting, I think, is particularly beautiful because it paints the crucifixion, but at the same time as well, the whole resurrection. What the artist has done literally is push the red, the blood of the red, the suffering, as the background on the back. And look at Jesus and John and his mother and Jesus' mother. They're all dressed already in white. As if the suffering, yes, it's there, the crucifixion has happened, but the resurrection is already foretold in this painting. Look even how the drips of the wound coming from Christ's side is now running on his leg, but it hasn't touched the loincloth at all. The loincloth, as you can see, is still pure white. Next. Zuberan's Agnus Dei. Who likes this painting? Yep, again, 70–80%. This wonderful painting, it was a great sort of counter-Reformation painting that was painted in Spain, sort of at the height of the Baroque. And Zuberan, he painted about 20 to 30 different versions of this particular painting, and this is the one that's in the Prado Museum in Madrid, depicting Jesus, depicting the Lamb of God with sort of tied legs. One of the reasons why I showed this painting is that because, as I said, I've been writing these Christian art entries for the last 6 years, is that in 6 years, only once has a post that I posted been banned, and that was this painting. Facebook and Instagram blocked us for over a week because they said we were promoting animal cruelty. And so it took a long time to then rectify it, but I think I agree with, well, all of you really. This is a very beautiful painting, and it's quite small, so it's about this size. And I think that's one of the main decisions that an artist has to take at the very beginning when he or she decides to make an artwork is, what size am I going to paint this on? Like the previous painting, it's very imposing, it's an altarpiece, it needs to be big. But then if a painting is quite small, it interacts in a completely different way with us, the viewer. Like a painting like this, you have to stand close to it. You have to interact at a very sort of very close level. So it gives that intimacy between us, the viewer, and the artwork. And then the last slide. Francis Bacon, one of his popes, who likes this? Yeah, about 25% of you, if I would have to put a number on it. Yes, so his painting of Pope Innocent X after Velázquez, he never actually saw the original painting. The original of this painting is in the Palazzo Doria Pamphili in Rome, and Francis Bacon only saw images. And he bought all these art books about the Spanish Baroque painting. He tore out the pages, always coming back to this very famous Velázquez painting. And it's quite amazing that he got so obsessed with it without actually having seen the original. And it's quite a difficult image. He was asked numerous times, is this a criticism of the Pope, or is this a criticism of the Church? And he said, no, I just like that painting, and this is how I will respond to that painting, sort of in this typical sort of innerly torn fashion. Great, so if we now move to the next slide. So what these three stories that I told at the beginning have done, and these 5 examples where all of you reacted in a different way to the artworks, what I want to explore now is there something ultimately as something like objective beauty, something that transcends all of our sort of subjective ideas and subjective tastes. And that is what I want to explore. And we have to start in Greek philosophy. So we'll do a bit of philosophy and a bit of theology, and then we'll hopefully get closer to an answer. So you're all probably very familiar with Plato. So the illustration I'm using here was discovered in a house, a private house in Pompeii, and it was near intact because the lava literally had covered it, and when they unearthed it, there was this almost perfect mosaic underneath. And the Romans were really enamored with Greek philosophy. I mean, they had good philosophers as well, but all their philosophy was mainly based on the Greek philosophers. And here we have the school of Plato, with Plato sitting here. We have Aristotle there, some other disciples. We have a globe up there on the top of this column, this globe for the heavenly realm, and then we have a globe here for the earthly realm, with one of the philosophers having his foot on it to say, we actually know what is going on here on earth, and we can make sense of all of it. So, what Plato said, he said when we look at things when we are around, and if you could move to the next slide, what Plato said is he says, everything that we see in our world, including beauty, is actually only a reflection of this perfect beauty that is somewhere else. So if we talk and we see a table, he would say, we could say this is a beautiful table, but we can only say that that is beautiful because somehow in the back of our minds we have this idealized form of what a perfect table is. And he explains it by the allegory of the cave. Probably you all remember it from your school days. So he says, this is us in this world. There's this man sitting here. We're all imprisoned in a cave. And what we see in this life is only a shadow that's projected on the wall. So what we see in this life is not really real. It's only a reflection of a perfect world that is out there. And so when this man would be set free and would walk around and then leave the cave, then he would actually find where the true things are. And he says that is what beauty is. He says in this world, nothing can ever be really beautiful, because pure beauty and true beauty is in this other realm. And it's a great concept for us for Christianity. There's a big fault with it, and I'll come to it in a minute. But the good thing is that because of Plato, we start to think that not everything that surrounds us, that is it. Plato sort of already takes us in his philosophy to sort of think of things outside this world and outside this realm and reality. But as I said, there is a big problem with it, because then if you go through life thinking that this is truly the case, then that could never work with our Christian faith. Because when God created the world, we say, and in Scripture says, and so we believe, that God created the world and he saw that all was good. God didn't create the world and said, well, all these things that are here, that's just a shadow of actually heaven. No, he created a perfect world, and that is what we believe in as well. Or if we were to believe Plato, then we believe that actually our souls would be much more important than our bodies. And in our Christian theology, we believe that soul and body are equally important. That's where all sort of our theology of the body comes from. Or when we die, for example, that we can't just say that it's the soul escaping our body, that it's trapped in a body, and now, the soul is released and goes to heaven. No, we believe in the resurrection of the soul and of the body. So, Plato gets things right, but not everything right. And then we move to our next, one of his students, one of his pupils, Aristotle. And Aristotle saw that there was something fundamentally flawed with the Platonic way of thinking. And Aristotle said, but all these things that we see around us, there is inherent beauty in them. Just imagine for a minute, Plato and Aristotle going for a walk and seeing a beautiful flower. Plato would say, yeah, it's okay, but there's this flower in this other world which is actually perfect. So what we see here, it's just okay. Whereas Aristotle would say, no, what we see here is something that is truly beautiful, and that can be truly relished. And so we shouldn't always just think of this other world, but we should think of the perfection of the things that surrounds us. And so there we start to move already closer to a more Christian way of seeing the world. That yes, there is this other world, but at the same time, there is this world that we have to love and appreciate and care for as well. And so Aristotle talks very briefly. He doesn't sort of expand too much on beauty, but he gives us these first 4 very good clues in a way to say, when do we see beauty? Then he says, when something is nicely ordered, when there is this clarity in it, or when things are perfectly proportioned. And then this clarity, as I said, and then that things have a clear purpose. So that when a work of art is made, he would argue a temple, that actually there is beauty also because of the purpose that it serves, i.e. the worship. So I've just shown you, I'll just show you a sculpture that was made around the time that Aristotle lived, just a bit before him, which is the Discobulos, again, a sculpture that you're probably all very familiar with. The original has been lost for I don't know, for 2,000 years actually. And it was a Greek sculpture that was largely copied by the Romans. So actually most of the surviving examples that we have, and there are quite a few examples, are actually Roman copies of this early Greek sculpture. So I think, just looking at these points that Aristotle made, I think when we come to sacred art, and if we have to talk about sacred art, then a lot of these things can be found in, say, if we want to build a beautiful church or a beautiful chalice, then order, proportion, clarity, and purpose are sort of these key ingredients. So Aristotle gives us a good sort of way forward. And then we come, of course, after these Greek philosophers, Christ is born, the incarnation happens. And by that time, of course, in parallel with these Greek philosophers and with all these pagan writings, if I can put it like that, there is, of course, our whole story of Israel and the whole story of Scripture in the Old Testament. And I think it's not the purpose of this talk, but what we have in the Old Testament happening time and time again is how a lot of these writers write about God as this master creator, this architect, this artist, who hasn't just sort of created the world and left the world to it. No, he created the world and still continues to joyfully interact with the world. I mean, think of even how our Bible starts. When he creates Adam and Eve, where does he put them? He puts them in the Garden of Eden. He doesn't put them in the field of Eden or in the forest of Eden. No, he puts them in the Garden of Eden. So that means, what is a garden when we garden? It's something that's already beautiful. Nature, we interact with it to make it even more beautiful. So God himself, by creating the Garden of Eden, must have, at some stage, joyfully interacted with this creation to embellish it even further and to put us in the midst of it, us humanity. Think of the story of Moses. Moses going on Mount Sinai, the 10 Commandments are given to him. Immediately after, a few minutes later, God tells him, well, you've received the 10 Commandments, the tablets. Now go back down and build me a tabernacle, and build me a lampstand, and build me a table made of acacia wood, 6 cubits long, 4 cubits wide, 3 cubits high, etc., etc. And so if you are to read chapters 24 to chapters 33 from the book of Exodus, you will see God as this artist at work. And they're amazing chapters, because he gives the measurements of all these things that have to be built. He gives the depth, the height, he gives the materials, but not only the materials. He tells Moses, he says, I don't want anyone just to make these works of art like the tabernacle. I'm calling two people, Bezalel and Aholiab, to be the artists to build these things. So there is something like that as a vocation as an artist. Because sometimes parents tell me like, oh, my daughter wants to be an artist. And it's not really a proper vocation. Well, it is a proper vocation to be an artist, etc. So we can give countless examples of how God is portrayed very regularly in the Old Testament as this artist. So when God and the Holy Trinity and now Jesus, the incarnation, comes into the world, it's normal, because he's made in the image and the likeness of his Father, that he has these qualities of his Father, these qualities of an artist. And that is what we see in Jesus, to me, when he tells us parables. I mean, so many of his teachings are told as an artist would tell them, by painting images in our minds. Jesus doesn't speak to us in high theology. I mean, the theology is all there, of course. But he tells us simple stories that we can easily remember. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. It shocks us, but we remember it. We remember the camel and the needle. The Good Samaritan. Yes, he could teach us, well, you need to be compassionate and this and that. But when the story is told of the Good Samaritan, we get it. And that is what Jesus does, is he paints these images in our minds as an artist does. So what has happened? Having had a look now at the Greek philosophers, and then the story of Scripture, which is the foundation of all of it, and then Jesus, is that then the first church father who starts to bring a theology of beauty together is Saint Augustine. And he sees merit in Plato and Aristotle, and he says in Plato, yes, Plato, you are right, that true beauty draws us beyond ourselves and reflects an eternal order that is somewhere out there. But we know now what this eternal order is, and that is God. And then he says, Aristotle, you were right as well, because he said that beauty is here in the here and now, not just in the eternal. So Augustine says, you are right, so we need to look after our creation and protect it, because as it comes from God, we need to have the right attitude towards it. And then he says, and then through Christ, beauty is a path to God. Christ is the full revelation of beauty, as Christ is created in the image of God, which is a very Pauline of St. Paul, a very Pauline interpretation. So that is what St. Augustine does, and this is really the whole foundation of us embracing so much as a church this whole idea of art, because deep down we know that art puts us in touch with this other realm, with this eternal order that is somewhere out there, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So if we could have the next slide. Just the painting of St. Augustine, just because we had the installation of our new Archbishop over the weekend, I thought it was fun and very appropriate to show this painting here of St. Augustine being installed as a bishop here. So we see the installation here of him receiving the mitre, and there's this beautiful central line with the holy water sort of font there, and then the thurifer, and then the boat down there. And then so we have this perfect, as we were discussing, order there, this perfect clarity, this perfect proportion. Then in the top right, we see St. Augustine's priestly ordination. And then here we see St. Augustine preaching with his bishop listening, so which is quite scary. And then we have his mother, Saint Monica, there praying the rosary while she's listening to her son. And then in the top right corner, we have this depiction of this beautiful legend or story about Saint Augustine. You know, his seminal work is De Trinitate, so about the Trinity. And it is said that one day he was walking along the beach and there was this young boy playing who had dug a hole in the sand, and he was bringing water from the sea, putting it in the hole, back to the sea, putting it in the hole. And St. Augustine went to talk to him and he said, well, I mean, isn't this absolutely pointless what you're doing? You can never fit the whole sea in that hole. And apparently the boy then spoke back to St. Augustine, and it is completely impossible for you to put the Trinity and all about the Trinity in your books. Okay, next slide. So after St. Augustine, so there we are in the 4th century, what happens then in Christian art between then and Thomas Aquinas? Well, very little. I mean, not very little. There's a lot happens. But probably the most important key moment is, before I get to Thomas Aquinas, is the moment of all the iconoclastic destructions that happened, which mainly came to the fore during the rise of Islam in the 8th century. So the Muslims at the time, this is literally the start sort of Islam very early on, they completely forbade any graven images, any depictions of God or of any of the prophets, strictly forbidden. And a lot of people in the Christian church were thinking, well, maybe they have a point. Doesn't it say in the Old Testament that we should not worship graven images? And so there was this whole debate going on, which was causing a lot of upset within the Christian church. And so a view had to be taken what we would do as a church. Would we permit images or not permit them? And then there was this great saint, Saint John of Damascus, or Saint John Damascene, in the 8th century, who then literally gives us this very simple argument, but very true argument. And he says, well, if God created his Son in his image and his likeness, it means that God himself made images. And so, if God makes images, then we can make images too. And when we make images, in fact, we sort of participate in what God is doing. And so we can go full circle. And it's sort of like, if it's good enough for God to use images, well, then it's good enough for us as well to use images. And so it's really with St. John of Damascus that suddenly we feel in the church this great seriousness about art. And so without St. John of Damascus, we literally wouldn't have medieval cathedrals and all the wonderful art that has ensued. Anyway, so we come now to the 13th century with another great of our theologians, St. Thomas Aquinas. And St. Thomas Aquinas goes now finally, which is the question of tonight. He says, is there such thing as objective beauty? And he says yes. And he says it happens at the interaction when three things happen: integritas, consonantia, and claritas. Integritas, where our English word integrity comes from. It means it's about one thing. So if we look at this stained glass window in Notre Dame in Paris, with Our Lady here at the center, and Christ, from literally everything sort of bursts out from them. He says if you look at that stained glass window, it's integritas, it's about one thing. And then he says consonantia. Consonare, to sound, sonare, con, together. So it's the coming together of various different disciplines, artists, craftsmen, worksmen. So in order to achieve this stained glass window, you need an architect, you need a stonemason, you need a glass blower, you need this, that. So it's the coming together of all these various elements. And then the claritas is this element when we see these beautiful works of art that we go, wow. And that, I think, is what happened when we looked at Michelangelo's Pietà. That the minute you see it, or when you've seen it for the first time in your life, whenever you were in Rome, you all have this wow element when you see the thing. That's absolutely extraordinary, this piece. And he says, when you have these three, then you are in objective beauty. And he says, furthermore, if it's subjective beauty, and I would say, well, you don't like this Warhol painting or this Basquiat painting, you can sort of talk about it, but you wouldn't sort of be shocked as if somebody was to say, Michelangelo's sculpture, oh, I think it's really ugly. We would all have a reaction. And this reaction means that it grates something deep inside. And he says that is when we have objective beauty. Right, so if we have the next slide. So our question of tonight, is beauty in the eye of the beholder? The answer needs to be sort of both, really. Yes, because each of us come from different backgrounds. Some of us have learned more about art than others. We are used to seeing maybe Oriental art, not Western art. So there is, of course, a great subjectivity to it. So, but at the same time, some beauty is not just opinion or taste. So when we have this wholeness, harmony, and radiance, then we are in the objective realm. And that is what he calls, Aquinas, beauty with a capital B. And so, if we move to the next slide. So, if we say, well, yes, there is subjective and objective beauty, then maybe the real question is not, is beauty in the eye of the beholder, but rather, what kind of a beholder am I becoming? And I think that is a very important point, I think, because it's something that I've experienced myself. And if you take the next slide, is that as I was making my way through seminary and journeying towards the priesthood, my taste changed. Something like this, 10 years ago, I would have appreciated and I would have said, yes, it's good, it's valid art, it's okay. But I wouldn't have necessarily liked it or sort of treasured it. And then because of what has happened in the last 10 years, my taste has changed, that now this work of art I find really, really beautiful. It's made in Crete in around 1600, and it shows St. Gregory, St. Basil, and can't remember now, the third one anyway. So moving to the next slide, there it was the opposite movement that was taking place. These paintings by Damien Hirst, I used to absolutely love them, and we used to sell quite a lot of them, and I thought they were fun, they were very avant-garde, it was very daring, collectors were paying very good money for them. And now when I see these paintings, I think like, dear, how could I have liked them so much? And I'm not being dismissive about it at all, but I think that's what I mean, is that the eye of the beholder has become different. And I think that is what all of us can do, because that's what faith is always about reading, and is always about pushing ourselves and learning more. And that the more I think and I believe, the more we get deeper and deeper into our faith, then our eyes change with it. Because I think that is what we do, is that we look at things the whole time, day in, day out. When you just think for a moment of all the actions that we do, of walking, eating, anything we do, everything always comes at a stop and as a halt. When the act of, say, eating is finished, it's finished. When we walk, we stop walking, the act of walking is finished. But seeing is completely different. We see the whole time. Even when we sleep, we see, we dream. So the whole visual side of things is incredibly important. And that is what, as a church, we have always recognized. And so if we go to the next slide. And one of the people who, in my view, has recognized that so well in the last 100 years is the Swiss priest and theologian Hans Urs von Balthasar. And he did a lot of work at the Vatican, and he talks about the three transcendentals. I mean, Thomas Aquinas was already, so there's nothing new. So what are transcendentals? Transcendentals, as the word says, are these things that transcends me as a person and transcends you and you and you and you. So, say truth. If you are a Roman soldier in the first century, you want to know the truth about things. If you lived in Renaissance Italy, you want truth. People have always been seeking truth. So truth sort of transcends. Same with goodness. We want to surround ourselves with good people. We want kindness and goodness around us. So he says there are these three transcendentals that through time, space, ages is what inside each of us we always seek. And he says, as a church for the last 2,000 years, the way we've communicated the faith to the faithful is starting to talk about the truth. Nothing wrong with it. If the churches are packed, the churches are full, things are going well, that's what you can do as church and as priests, to talk about this is the truth. And if you follow the truth, you will lead a good life, and this is what it looks like. This is what goodness looks like. And then there is beauty to surround ourselves with, to just embellish things and whatever. And he said already in the 1960s, Hans Urs von Balthasar, he says the moment will come when the church pews will empty, when people, and especially young people, won't come to church anymore. And he says then we won't be able to do that. Thinking of friends now, my friends. If I would tell them, I say, can I tell you the truth now? They would go like, whoa, 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 whoa. Or if I say, can I tell you what it is, what a good life could be like or should be, they would all run a mile. But put them in the presence of beauty. You don't say anything. You just place them in beauty, and then something will happen. And maybe the best example is that before I entered seminary, is that I used to come quite regularly to evening prayer here to Vespers in the cathedral, in the Lady Chapel, one of the most beautiful things I think we do here at the cathedral. And so when I was meeting a friend, say once a month, once every 6 weeks, I said, yes, let's meet for dinner at 6:37, but why don't you come at 5 o'clock to Vespers, and then we'll go for drinks and then for dinner. And they said, oh, well, yes. And I mean, on the whole, sort of, I did this with friends who were not going to church at all. So they come, they sat there, they listened to 20, 30 minutes of the most beautiful song music. They don't know what it is, they haven't got a clue. And lo and behold, later on, there was always a stage during the evening where they would ask, 3 hours ago, what were you actually singing? Oh, it's the Psalms and the praise of the church, and we sing the Psalms here as they do in New York, as they do in Manila, as they do all right. And so because of the beauty of the music, it's sort of something inside of these people sort of awakens their curiosity. And that is why I believe that it's nice to talk about art and write about art and whatever, but I really truly believe that beauty is such an important instrument that we have in our arsenal as a church to try and bring people back to the faith. And that is what we're trying to do with the website, is to try and convey that, to try and send out beautiful pictures so that people will just look at the picture and then maybe start reading the gospel, etc. So I think, so if you take the next slide. Oh yeah, well, that's it. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you. So, questions?